Hi everyone, today we are covering our last chapter, chapter 18, and this is about group presentations. And while we are not doing a group presentation in this Fundamentals of Speech class, you will likely have to do group presentations many times in your college career and then even in the business and career world. So we'll cover some concepts here today for group presentations, and then we are going to have that group workshop for leading into our Speech 4 presentations, where we can work together to acknowledge some things that you all have done really well in preparing for Speech 4 and provide some reminders and constructive criticism to really make our Speech 4 presentations the best they can possibly be. So that's kind of how we're going to be applying this Chapter 18 group presentations within our class this semester, but knowing a lot of these concepts will extend to beyond this class and be very useful in the rest of your lives. So to get started, let's talk a little bit about some prominent definitions from this chapter. So the first one I want to talk about is small group interaction, and this is the process by which 3 or more members of a group exchange verbal and nonverbal messages in an attempt to influence one another. And guys, a small group in this chapter and largely in communication as a whole is defined as between 3 and 15 members. So if you're beyond 15 members, you're in a very large group setting, and the small group concepts don't apply as well. If you're 1 or 2 people, that's more of like a dyad or interpersonal type of communication there. So small group is typically defined between 3 and 15 people. And we exchange verbal and nonverbal communication. So obviously verbal communication so that we can set group times, work through concepts, get some really great ideas, work through conflict, all those kinds of things. We have to have that verbal communication aspect, but also nonverbal communication. So knowing how your facial expressions look as you are interacting with your group members. Even your presence and not your presence. Like if you miss a meeting, or if you're really late for a meeting, those kinds of things. That is all nonverbal communication, and that all sends a message. So not only our gestures, our facial expression, but also our presence with nonverbal communication. And guys, I want to clarify here the difference between a small group and a team, which you can kind of think are one and the same, and in a sense they are. Typically they are, but there is a difference. So small group communication means that you feel a sense of belonging to a group and you influence each other. So this could be a worship group, it could be a fraternity or a sorority, it could be an art club, something like that. So small groups where you just share a common interest. A team, on the other hand, is a coordinated group of people organized to work together to achieve a specific common goal. So you can see where small group communication can either be where you're more just agreeing and sharing a common interest, or it can be more of a team atmosphere where you're working to achieve a goal. And I think in the small group communication setting where you are in a group project, that is going to be more of a team-oriented approach because you have that objective of getting a grade. So just a little bit of a clarification there as we move into the group communication definition. Then we have this definition of group communication, the process of creating meanings in the minds of others. And our text talks about small groups have to have this common purpose. So oftentimes in college, you're going to have a group project where your common purpose is meeting the goals and the objectives of the group project and working together to do so in order to earn a grade and pass the class. And that gets larger and larger as you get into the business world. You're not only earning a grade, but it's your job, right? So group communication, the process of creating meanings in the minds of others. So you are sharing what you've learned, you're sharing the information, you have this cohesion in working toward a goal, a common objective. So that leads us into cohesiveness, the tendency for a group to stick together and remain unified in pursuit of instrumental objectives. So that is where group communication can be somewhat of a challenge sometimes, right? We have to have this cohesion to really be a successful group. And that means acknowledging differences and working through conflict, any conflict that might come up, in order to present that cohesive, unified front in the end, right? And then we have social loafing. This is the decreased effort of each individual member as the number of a group increases. So social loafing happens more often as your group gets bigger and bigger because you're probably less noticeable if you are a social loafer. So oftentimes you'll hear memes or stories of people that say, I did the group project all by myself and everybody got credit for it. Well, that's due to social loafing, where one or two people in your group maybe don't hold their weight and do as much as the other group members. And again, that becomes more and more obvious if there's more people to fill in the gaps and carry a little bit extra weight. So try and always not be the social loafer. You want to be the one that's really contributing and providing that cohesive element in your group. And then protocols, this is mutually agreed upon ways of interacting. So this is different for each group. And we'll get into this a little bit with leadership styles and the way that we handle conflict. So mutually agreed upon ways of interacting. Examples of this would be deciding if you are largely going to meet in person, if one person really likes text messaging and it's really annoying to others that would really like to meet in person. So you might really, as a group in your first couple meetings, set up how you want to interact in a weekly schedule, weekly tasks, those kinds of things. So protocol is how you are going to interact in that specific group setting for that time period. So we'll move on to these interaction roles within our small groups, and we have task roles, we have group building and maintenance roles, and we have individual roles, all of which are equally important, I think. So task roles are focused on script development, cohesive language, transitions, and consistent graphics. So really that overall consistency, that group feel, and I really like where your text says, that your group presentation is not an individual narrative. So you are working together to create one cohesive message. And that is what this task person does. You're making sure you have a consistent theme in your PowerPoints. You're making sure the writing is very consistent. You are going to have people working individually and bringing together a lot of different things likely in your presentation. But then you really have to come together and make it one cohesive, unified presentation, and that's what task roles are for. Then we have group building and maintenance roles, and this is your communication strategy that we talked about a little bit before, supporting and enhancing learning. So oftentimes a lot of group members will come with various ideas about how to tackle the project or the group presentation, and you'll kind of have to weed around and decide whose ideas work best. Maybe you're going to combine a couple ideas, but always fostering a positive learning environment and an accepting environment where you are taking everyone's ideas equally and really ruminating on things. And that can be a challenge at times. So this is that group building and maintenance role, supporting and enhancing learning, working through differences. And that leads into individual roles and choosing a leader. And oftentimes, guys, I find that one or two people in the group, in my experience, will kind of naturally step forward and be the group. And that's not to say that you can't challenge yourself to be the leader, especially if you're really good at something or you really find managing people fun even. You'll automatically kind of gravitate towards that individual role there. And there's three leadership styles. There's directive, participatory, and negligent. And I'll talk about those here in a second. But I often find also here, our text really focuses on leading into that leadership role, but there are all these other people within our group, and often the leader will dip into these task and maintenance roles as well. But you'll often find this person in the group that is really good at maintenance roles, and they're the one that kind of keeps the peace and makes everything very level and cohesive. And then you will have this task person that's very detail-oriented and make sure everything looks nice and everybody is coordinated. So just a little background from my own personal experience there. You'll often see people that just naturally fit into these roles as well. So leadership roles here: directive, participatory, and negligent. Okay guys, so we have directive leadership style, which is where a leader uses an authoritarian method of dealing with group members according to our text. So here I often think of the quote, "It's my way or the highway" for directive leadership style, but that's not really the case. You can have a very positive directive leadership style, and some people really appreciate knowing exactly what they have to do, when they have to do it, and how you're going to accomplish the goal. We also have participatory leadership style, which centers around a designated leader who offers guidance, suggestions, listening, and concern for members while also showing concern for completing the task. So like directive leadership, you are very concerned with getting to that end goal, but you're also concerned with more of that maintenance and relationship style within your group, and really working together, dealing with that conflict, dealing with differences of opinion, and working together to come to that overall conclusive solution. And then we have the negligent or laissez-faire leadership style, which your text says is characterized by a leader who offers little guidance or direction. So the group leader may guide the communication planning by first initiating a conversation. And again, we have to go back to those protocols and those communication styles that you come to agree upon for your group, knowing that some people, again, may prefer texting, may prefer email, and you have to take that into account as the leader. And often negligent leaders don't. They just attempt to start that conversation and kind of hope that that works out, and that's their leadership goal. So here it kind of seems like directive, you're going to really get things done. Negligent, you're starting that conversation, but the end goal is kind of still up for grabs. And participatory, you are concerned with both feelings, approach, maintenance, and that end goal there. I mentioned earlier that group members kind of all naturally fall into a certain role within the group, and often it falls back to how you fit into the group, falls back to this table. I really liked this table from your text that talks about preparation, organization, and delivery. So as a group member, you all have responsibilities. Remember, we're all trying to avoid being social loafers. So think about in the preparation stage, how do I prepare as an individual? So what do I need to bring to the group? What do I need to bring to each respective group meeting? What do I need to communicate to the group? What is my experience with group work? Am I very good at group work? Do I know how to tackle group work in a specific time period with how many group members you have? And what is your familiarity with participatory communication modes in this setting? So maybe you're really familiar with Google Docs and you can teach your group how to effectively communicate there. Maybe you're very familiar with a Zoom that we use, and you can talk wherever, whenever. You don't necessarily have to have a meeting in a certain place. Thinking about organization, what is my knowledge related to this specific assignment? What expertise do I have that I can help the group within the time constraints? And this made me think, I was in advanced physics when I was in high school, and I am not the most confident math person. I'm very much a talker. So in that group, I did really work on the math, and I had to work really hard at figuring out certain equations and understanding things, knowing that I would have to take a test over it as well after the group presentation. But what I could bring to the group, that extra oomph for our group, was making a video to really show the application of those math problems, those physics problems. So our group ended up being pretty cool because we had that creative element within the group along with those math nerd type of people that helped handle the equation side of things. So that's often the really cool part about groups, is that you have all these different learning styles and assets within your group, and it's just knowing how to harness them to come together and really make the best group presentation. And then delivery, thinking about your degree of confidence, what you need to do to develop an interesting presentation, know about the audience, all those things. So really look at this table. I think it's really helpful in thinking about yourself within your group presentations. Along with those different learning styles and those different strengths within a group, you're going to come to a couple conflicts most likely in preparing your group presentation. And here's another really good chart on the do's and don'ts of conflict. So you want to come up with a negotiation strategy, which involves your overall approach you take when you exchange proposals and counter proposals with another person when discussing a settlement up to a conflict. So here you want to think do's. You want to be open to compromise, willing to cooperate, willing to discuss, willing to vote on disagreements. And you want to avoid unpleasant or undesirable group activities. You want to avoid dominating the group conversation. You want to create that cohesiveness, that back and forth, that conversational element. You don't want to sidetrack the group. Obviously, you don't want to fail to complete the agreed upon tasks, and you don't want to just destroy group harmony with your attitude about previous group experiences. So even if you've had a bad group experience, really, really try to come to each group experience, group presentation, group project with an open mind, and always thinking back here to this negotiation strategy and how can you get better in these group situations, because you are going to encounter them so often. And then we have groupthink here. Groupthink is a faulty sense of agreement that occurs when group members seemingly agree, but they primarily want to avoid conflict. And guys, this is bad. You want to really, really avoid groupthink. Always speak up, always be willing to enter some form of conflict, but knowing that conflict can be resolved very positively, optimistically. It doesn't have to be a Debbie Downer kind of thing. You can agree without starting a huge disagreement or conflict. So speak up when you don't agree, work through it positively, thinking about these do's and don'ts in those situations. Okay, so here guys, I'll briefly talk about the types of group presentations. So a debate is a structured argument in which participants speak for or against a pre-announced proposition. So you'll often see this obviously in speech and debate, where you are given that pre-announced proposition and asked to argue for or against the proposition. Then we have a forum, and this is essentially a question and answer session where someone in a field is asking experts on the field certain questions and hearing their responses. So for example, I went to a women's conference in Cheyenne, and they had very prominent women leaders sitting on a forum, and another leader was asking them questions, and each went through and shared their answers to that question, their expertise in that field. Then we have a panel. A panel consists of a group of experts publicly discussing a topic amongst themselves. And if they have prepared it all, it's just very brief opening statements. And I often think here about like ESPN, when they have the group of ex-coaches and athletes sitting around on the big table to discuss a certain game, issue, player, etc. And then we have a symposium, which is a series of short speeches, usually informative on various aspects of the same general topic. So we're reviewing these 4 types of presentations as you prepare for your Chapter 18 quiz. So this section on organizing for your audience really ties back to what we've learned in individually creating our own messages in this class. So thinking about content. So we're obviously going to have that research. How are we really going to make it relate to our audience? Are people really high-level knowledge? Are they experts in the field where you can use a lot of jargon? Are they very low-level knowledge and new to the subject area where you need to provide a lot of definitions, explanations, experiences? So thinking about the content, and that leads into the structure, so our organization and how we are going to present our main points. Thinking about packaging here, so knowing that 70% of our information needs to be in the body of the speech. How are we going to really entice interest in our intro and really wrap things up and maybe even have a call to action in our conclusion based on our presentation there. And then thinking, obviously, guys, about the human element, and we're really focused on this moving into speech 4. So what can you bring into the topic? How can you make it really hit home with your audience members, that human connection? What types of stories are common and relatable to the audience? What attitudes, beliefs, and values do they hold? So thinking back to our persuasive toolbox and our persuasive lecture and all those theories, inductive, deductive reasoning that you can apply to make that topic and that information really real to the audience. So that is organizing for your audience, going back and thinking about the structure, content, packaging, and human element of your message in group presentations as well. And last but definitely not least here is delivering your presentation as one. So again, reading up on all of these bullet points, there's pretty considerable paragraphs describing each of these elements, but the purpose, basically making sure you are always coming back to I am informing here or I am persuading here, and that all of your group members are on board with that one general purpose. Then your oral content. So what is each person going to share? How are you going to break that up between people? Making sure that that is very clear, understood, and practiced in rehearsal. Your dress. So often you'll coordinate your dress maybe with colors, maybe with the style. Are you casual, business casual, formal, so that everyone looks like a unified front there. Facilities, thinking about where you will be presenting and whether you have 3 members or 8 members and how you're going to structure being in the room and passing the torch, really. So you might not have a microphone, but passing the speaking ability from one person to the next. So I'd often say, as I was transitioning, so I just talked about blah, 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 whatever I had talked about, my main points, and now I'm going to pass it to Morgan to talk about our next points, A, B, C. Okay, your visuals. So how are your visual aids going to play into that? Is there going to be one person that's handling the visual aid that has to practice and know when to change the slide? Is there going to be one person that has maybe a clicker and you're going to pass it as you pass who is speaking around the group? So as you transition around who is speaking. Delivery. Is it a very solemn topic where you are going to make sure that your tone matches the severity of the topic? Is it a very fun topic where everyone needs to be very dynamic and enthusiastic? So coordinating, again, all of these things, delivery, dress, facilities, rehearsals, and rehearsing, making sure you have practiced those transitions, getting from one person to the other, making sure that everybody knows what they're talking about in the presentation so that it runs smoothly. So that's what I have for you for our group presentation, Chapter 18 lecture, and I will see you soon for our Speech 4 workshop.